Okay, so you've already been throughout your life as a math student. You've already seen natural numbers. You've already seen certain types of numbers that are whole numbers because they don't have decimals with them. But it's time to learn what to call these numbers, because when you're in tests, they're going to call these numbers by a certain name, and you'll need to know which numbers they're referring to. So the natural numbers are numbers that we use to count objects with, right? So that starts with 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on to infinity, right? Those are natural numbers, and they're also known as counting numbers. But we have another group of numbers called whole numbers. We hear whole numbers mentioned a lot, and maybe it's not so obvious what those are. Well, whole numbers are almost like natural numbers, except they include the number 0. Then we have a set of numbers that include the negative versions of natural numbers. So natural numbers start with 1 and go on to infinity. But all those numbers have negative versions: -1, -2, -3, -4, and so on. When we include the negative versions as well as 0 and all the positive numbers, then we call that group of numbers the integers. So that's what integers are. Integers are like whole numbers, except they have negative numbers as well as positive numbers and 0, right? So here's a question we can try to answer. The question says, describe the following numbers as natural, whole, or integer. And there's a note. There may be more than one answer for each. So number 1 is 1. Is 1 a natural number, a whole number, or an integer? Well, we know that 1 is the very first natural number, since natural numbers are counting numbers. So 1 is a natural number, right? But is it any other type of number? Well, it's also a whole number, because whole numbers begin with 0 and keep going up by 1. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, those are whole numbers. So 1 is a natural number, and it's also a whole number. 1 is also an integer, because integer includes all the natural numbers and all the whole numbers, and then adds to that the negative natural numbers. So 1 is an integer. So 1 is a number that fits in all 3 categories: natural, whole, and integer. What about 0? 0 is not a natural number because it's not one of the counting numbers. So we can get rid of natural. Is it a whole number? Yes, it's the first of the whole numbers. Right? So 0 is a whole number, even though it's not a natural number. Is it an integer? It's also an integer, because integer includes all the different categories. Right? So 0 is a whole number, but since integers include all the whole numbers, then 0 is also an integer. So 0 ends up being a whole number and an integer, but not a natural number. All right, number 3 is -3. Is -3 a natural number? No, because it's not a counting number. Is it a whole number? No, it's not, because whole numbers begin with 0. So all that's left is to consider whether it's an integer. Is it an integer? Well, it's a non-decimal number, right? And integers are all the non-decimal numbers, including the natural, the whole, and then the negative versions of the natural. So since 3 is a negative version of the number 3, it's an integer. So 3 is an integer, but it's not a natural number, and it's not a whole number. Usually it's easy to compare natural numbers, because we kind of just know that 2 is bigger than 1, 3 is bigger than 2, 4 is bigger than 3, and so on. It gets more complicated when you have negative numbers in the mix. So when we're dealing with the integers, then it gets a little more complicated. But if we use the number line from the beginning, it gets a lot easier, because looking at the number line, the larger numbers are always to the right of the smaller numbers, right? So 4 is larger than 1 because on the number line it's to the right of 1. When you're dealing with negative numbers, it's the same thing. So on the negative side of the number line, which is all the numbers to the left of 0, you still do the same thing. So negative 4 is larger than negative 8 because on the number line it's to the right of negative 8, right? So whenever you're ordering numbers and you want to know which number is bigger and which number is smaller, you just look which direction the numbers are from each other. Numbers that are bigger are on the right or to the right of numbers that are smaller. We can say it a different way. Numbers that are smaller are to the left of numbers that are bigger on the number line. So here we have an example. By placing them on the number line, show that 1 is greater than negative 4. Now, on the face of it, it might not be so obvious that 1 is greater than negative 4 if you're new to integers, right? Because 1 looks like it might be smaller than negative 4 because that 4 looks like a big number. However, when you place it on the number line, you notice that you have to place negative 4 to the left of 0 because it's on the negative side of the number line. And 1 has to go to the right of 0 because it's on the positive side of the number line. So since 1 is to the right of negative 4 on the number line, it's bigger than negative 4.